Good morning. This meeting is called to order. For the record, the time is 11 a.m. and the date is 3/25/25. The commission and staff are appearing from Helena, Montana in the Bollinger Room of the Montana Public Service Commission. I am Brad Molnar, President, and I'm the presiding chairman for this meeting. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For the record, the following commissioners are present. We have Commissioner Wellborn, Commissioner Pinocci, myself, Commissioner Molnar, Commissioner Fielder, and Commissioner Bukasek. Therefore, we have a quorum, 5 out of 5. The Public Service Commission welcomes any comment on any item that is on today's agenda or any matter that is within the jurisdiction of the Montana Public Service Commission. Are there any public commenters in the room? Seeing none. Are there any public commenters online? There are not. Are there any, for announcements, are there any changes to today's agenda or any unexpected late arrivals, early departures? There are none. Therefore, we have the minutes. Do I have a motion on the minutes as presented?
Mr. President, I move approval of the commission minutes for the week of March 17th, 2025.
We have a motion for approval. Do we have a second?
I second.
We have a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 And those opposed, same sign. Minutes have been approved. We're getting into our reason for being here. We'll begin the work session itself. And we're going to open up on docket 2024.04.047. I see our legal team moving forward. Yellowstone Energy Limited Partnership and Yelp's petition to set terms and conditions for qualifying small facility production facilities to consider the draft final order approving Yelp's petition.
Good morning, Mr. President and commissioners. This is, as President Molnar just stated, a work session to consider a final commission decision in docket 2024.04.047, which concerns Yellowstone Energy Limited Partnership, or Yelp. Yelp's petition to set terms and conditions for a qualifying small power production facility. Because I think this is the first QF work session that we've had since the commission was reformed here after the last election cycle, I'll begin by giving just a little bit more background than I normally would on PURPA itself before getting into the issues of this particular case. So the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978, or PURPA, requires electric utilities to purchase energy and capacity generated by qualifying facilities, which I'll call QFs for short. When a utility and a QF cannot agree on the terms of the sale of electricity and capacity, the commission must require the utility to purchase electricity under rates and conditions set by the commission. The purchase rate under that power purchase agreement must be just and reasonable to the electric consumers of the electric utility and in the public interest, and cannot discriminate against the qualifying facility. PURPA, however, does not allow rates that exceed the incremental cost to the electric utility of alternative electrical energy and capacity. So we call that the incremental cost. The incremental cost of alternative energy is defined in both the commission's own rules and in FERC's rules as the avoided cost, which is the cost to the electric utility for energy, which, but for a purchase from a QF, such utility would generate or purchase from another source. So on April 12th, 2024, Yelp filed its petition and supporting testimony asking this commission to set the terms and conditions of a power purchase agreement with Northwestern Energy. Both Northwestern Energy and the Montana Consumer Council eventually intervened and participated as parties in this case. The commission held a public hearing on Yelp's petition on September 25th of 2024. Yelp and Northwestern filed concurrent post-hearing briefs on November 26, 2024. and post-hearing response briefs on November 6th, 2024, and November 26th was the date of the reply briefs. MCC did not submit testimony or briefs in this proceeding. We typically see QF cases presented with two major rate issues. One is the avoided cost of energy, and one is the avoided cost of capacity. In this particular case, however, Yelp and Northwestern agreed to use the Western Energy Imbalance Market's locational marginal prices as the avoided cost of energy. So that means the primary disputes left between Yelp and Northwestern concern the avoided cost of capacity and a few non-rate contract terms. In other words, contract terms that don't affect the avoided cost calculations. As shown in the draft order that was circulated to commissioners, included in your binder materials and posted on Ready last week, staff has a recommendation that resolves all those disputed issues regarding the avoided cost of capacity and the non-rate contract terms. So starting very briefly with the avoided cost of capacity, staff's recommendation breaks this issue into three subparts. The first is whether or not Northwestern even needs capacity and when they need that capacity. Second is the avoided capacity resource, or the proxy resource that we use to determine what Northwestern is actually avoiding in terms of a capacity purchase in the future. And third is the methodology used to calculate the avoided cost of capacity. So starting with Northwestern's capacity needs, staff recommends concluding that Northwestern needs capacity in every year of the proposed power purchase agreement, which will begin in 2029, and that the power purchase agreement value Yelp's capacity in every single year in every season of every year of the 20-year term, of the power purchase agreement. So in other words, Northwestern needs capacity. That means that Yelp is entitled from the outset to a capacity payment. Second issue within the avoided cost of capacity is the avoided capacity resource. On this issue, staff recommends the use of an aeroderivative combustion turbine identified in the base case scenario of Northwestern's 2023 integrated resource plan. Once we use that resource as a proxy, staff also recommends resolving the third issue, the methodology to calculate the avoided cost of capacity, by denying Northwestern's proposed net cost of new entry method and instead using Yelp's proposal, which is similar to the method the commission has applied in past QF cases. That resolves all the issues on the avoided cost of capacity. As for the non-rate contract terms, staff recommends using calendar quarters to measure Yelp's performance under the contract, as opposed to the monthly performance assessments proposed by Northwestern. We also recommend that, given the resolution of Northwestern's capacity needs, which as a reminder is that they need capacity from day one of the new agreement, staff recommends adopting Yelp's proposed security provision, which limits the security payment to 1 year of capacity payments. Third, regarding capacity payment language, the parties appear to have resolved the issue that was identified in Northwestern's proposed language concerning the capacity payment. Yelp's proposed revision appears to resolve all of those issues, so staff recommends adopting Yelp's proposed revision. And finally, on the interconnection agreement, which was a major issue, or at least discussed during the hearing, the parties have agreed to a new interconnection agreement. When the parties agree to the terms and conditions of the sale of energy and capacity between the QF and the utility, this commission as an agency loses jurisdiction over those terms. So now that they have agreed on the interconnection terms, staff recommends letting that agreement stand because we don't have the authority to change it. So with that, staff would be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have about the draft recommendation embodied in that 30-page draft order. With me today, the chief of our regulatory division, Will Rosequist, and Neil Templeton, representing regulatory.
Thank you for that. Do I hear a motion on this work order, on this issue? I have a motion to,
I move to approve the draft order granting Yelp's petition with the terms and conditions described as the commission's final order, and authorize staff to make non-substantive changes.
do I hear a second?
I will second the motion. I second the motion.
The motion was made by Commissioner Bukasek and seconded by Vice President Fielder. Is there any discussion? Commissioner.
Want to discuss the reason for my decision, for my making the motion. The historical chronologic context justifies the aeroderivative as the next planned resource and justifies RAP QCC values over standalone ELCC. Yelp's arguments for escalating the cost of aero were more persuasive than Northwestern's arguments for de-escalation. Precedent adequately supports Yelp's proposed security payment and also Yelp's calendar quarter, as does the provision in the PPA that would penalize Yelp if it underperforms in any given month. I struggle, excuse me, I struggle with the acceptance of gross cone methodology in this time of rapid evolution toward rising influence of market forces and regionalization. Net cone is not new. It's used in ISOs and RTO decisions. Nevertheless, I agree that in this case, the choice of use of net cone was not persuasively mapped out, and we are bound by rules, laws, and evidentiary record. The draft order reflects our interest in considering net cone in the future with the inclusion of adequate argumentation into the evidentiary record. The underlying philosophical and legal regulatory basis for making long-term contracts such as this one is understandable given the culture and events of the 1970s. Northwestern's potential 2029 capacity from Colstrip and YCGS were not estimated at the time of the LEO. That's it.
Is there further discussion?
Mr. President,
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner.
I too support adoption of the draft order. I also had concerns as expressed by my colleague over the debate over gross cone versus net cone, but just found the record lacked sufficient evidence for the commission to sustain Northwestern's position on using net cone in this case. But I would note that it's my opinion that we could have used net cone if the record evidence had supported the request and the conclusions of Northwestern on that issue, but unfortunately it didn't. So I think we have really no viable alternative that's justified other than to include the use of gross cone in those calculations of avoided cost capacity. So it's obvious to me that the Dave Gates 50 megawatt aeroderivative plant is the next least cost planned resource, and that although Yelp argued for the Yellowstone County generation plant to be the proxy resource, that those costs can't be avoided because that plant is actually constructed and the cost can't be avoided at this point. So going with the Dave Gates generating station's 50 megawatt aeroderivative that's planned in the 2023 integrated resource plan seemed like the most reasonable and obvious choice for a proxy resource. So I think we have a fair order here, and I'm pleased to be able to support it today, Mr. President.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? I have two questions of legal counsel. Number one, would you please describe the difference between net cone and gross cone? That seems to be a issue that should this be challenged, I would like to be firm in my knowledge on it. To me, a cone and a filter are very closely aligned. Would you please state what each one is and why in your order you prefer one over the other?
Mr. President, Commissioners, I'd be happy to take a swing at that question, and I'll trust that my regulatory counterparts will jump in if I say anything incorrect about the difference between gross cone and net cone. So again, cone in this circumstance is an acronym, stands for cost of new entry. Gross cone looks a lot like the way the Commission has traditionally valued the avoided cost of capacity under the methods we've applied in prior cases, like the peaker method. So under that method, you look at a avoided resource, first identifying what that resource is. And again, in this case, staff recommends the Dave Gates generating station Arrow that is planned for construction and completion in 2029. You look at that resource, you calculate the total amount of capital and fixed costs, so fixed O&M that go into that resource, and you take that value, levelize it over the course of your power purchase agreement, and call that the avoided cost of capacity. So it just looks at the fixed costs of that avoided resource. to move from gross cone to net cone requires another adjustment to remove what Northwestern in this case is referred to as the net energy benefits of that proxy resource. And so to make that adjustment, you take the proxy resource's capacity to generate energy, all the energy that it will generate over the life of the PPA, multiply that volume of energy by the locational marginal price, which was the avoided cost of energy in this case, but it's so you take that volume of energy, multiply it by the locational marginal price, and subtract from that product, the result of that multiplication, the actual running costs of your resource, the proxy resource. And that difference between the running costs of the resource and what you project to be the revenue over the life of the PPA from the LMP prices is what Northwestern Energy refers to as the net energy benefit, which they would recommend subtracting from the capacity payment, so the avoided cost of capacity. We recommend sticking with the traditional method, which looks a lot like what we now call gross cone in this order, because we find that the record doesn't justify the complete move from that commission precedent over to the new net cone methodology. As Vice President Fielder noted, there may be circumstances in future cases where the record is more complete and provides a more detailed explanation of the basis for that adjustment. That could be persuasive to the commission, but at this stage, we would recommend sticking with the method the commission has applied in prior cases.
Thank you. Seeing nobody with their hand up, I assume we have concurrence. My last one, and this comes from Northwestern Energy's reply brief, page 2 and 3. I'll start with the record and then go into the quote. In fact, this argument is contrary to Yelp's own witness testimony confirming this separate relationship, which stated, and this goes to Netcone. So I'm referring to your testimony in the KELP docket. This would be the attorney for Northwestern. And I'm saying that you testified that to calculate the capacity rate, you should exclude the energy costs from the proxy resource because energy is already reflected in the avoided cost of energy. Answer, and this would be from Yelp's witness. Yeah, essentially you separate the two in measuring the avoided cost of capacity and then a separate analysis to determine the avoided cost of energy. Given the dichotomy of thought, discrepancy, shifting, how do we balance that with the final order if Yelp seems to be a little wishy-washy in the way they're looking at this?
Mr. President and Commissioners, two disclaimers at the front end. I don't have the full transcript in front of me to place that particular quote in context. I trust that you've read it correctly. However, out of the excerpt that was included in Northwestern's post-hearing briefing, I would say that the admission there is not quite as earth-shattering or conclusive as Northwestern has argued in that brief. Certainly all parties will, in these QF cases, look to distinguish, at least initially, the avoided cost of energy from the avoided cost of capacity. So what I take the witness to be saying there, Yelp's witness to be saying, is that they are proposing a method here that separates the avoided energy costs from the avoided capacity costs by leaving only the fixed costs, that is the capital costs and the fixed operating and maintenance costs on the capacity side of the equation, which is similar to what Northwestern had done in prior cases, indeed what the commission had done in prior cases to distinguish the energy costs, the supply costs, the variable operating and maintenance costs from the fixed costs that are part of capacity payments.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we will take a voice vote. For those in favor of this motion, say aye. Those opposed, say no. We'll start off to my left. Commissioner Wellborn. We are taking a voice vote on whether you support or oppose this motion after the discussion that we just had. Oh, Commissioner Wellborn.
I support.
Commissioner Pinocci.
I support staff recommendations.
Commissioner Bukacek. Bukacek,
Aye.
I'm sorry. Oh, aye.
I support.
And Commissioner Fielder.
I support passage of the motion.
And I also support the passage of the motion. Uh, uh, 5-0. Motion passes. Next, we have our legislative update. This is commission initiated to discuss bills relevant to the PSC mission, statutory authority, administrative processes, and general agency concerns and discuss the PSC budget requests, presentations, etc., and consider staff analysis and recommendations. Take it away, Trevor.
Mr. President, Commissioners, going to start off with some previous action. We're kind of back to the same format as pre-transmittal here. House Bill 2, our subcommittee D portion of House Bill 2 was heard in appropriations March 21st. Believe it or not, the rail car FTEs are back on the table. There's an amendment to reinstate 2 rail car FTEs. And they are, as we speak, taking executive action on Section D of House Bill 2 in the House Appropriations Committee. So I will go monitor that as soon as we're done here and follow up and see what they do.
Mr. President, question on that one?
Certainly, Commissioner.
Thank you. So I was in attendance at this hearing last week as a commission representative, and although Trevor took the lead, I was asked to come up and answer questions for legislators. And so there was a lot of discussion about the rail car program, and there was some strong opposition to having the state provide this safety service with the belief that the federal government should do it. But there was also a lot of interest in seeing the state watch out for the interests of the people of Montana by having safer railways and doing as much as we can to keep trains on the track, or as much as we reasonably can. So that was really interesting to see their interest surface without us pushing for it, which was nice. I think it was organic. Trevor, you said they're meeting an executive action right now.
Correct.
Is Mr. Sherwood up there in case they have any questions or anything? Because they had a lot of questions on this. If I would have known it was coming, I would have asked for him to be there last week.
Yeah, I don't believe Mr. Sherwood is up there right now. And also they haven't really been following a schedule in executive action. So it's kind of a crapshoot.
Okay, so that was kind of what I was wondering, is who from the agency might attend executive action in case they have more questions. And I'll just note that while we're on the House Bill 2 topic, the other issue that came up was the agency's performance report from 2024. And there was some very close scrutiny of that report. In fact, it was pulled up on the screen by the legislator asked for it to be pulled up on the screen, and staff already had it queued up. So they were ready to scroll through that and speak to it. But I will say that the good news was that although there was a couple questions about it, mostly it was positive comments about our performance at the agency and the report that we provided in response to a piece of legislation that required the performance reports. And I believe, if I'm not incorrect, the sponsor of that bill had indicated that he's instructed or admonished other agencies to do more like what the PSC's been doing. So that was kind of a nice stroke to us for the good work that's been happening at this agency.
Mr. President, I think it's safe to say he used this as a good example. So.
There'll be no more of it. Okay.
All right,
any further
continuing on
questions?
with previous action. The commission's House Bill 45 is still in Senate Energy, awaiting its last vote there. I don't anticipate any problems, although I have heard some scuttlebutt that the telcos may be bringing an amendment to that bill. It doesn't appear that that substantively changes what we want. It is a little awkward bringing an amendment to executive action in the second house prior to a hearing. But I am monitoring that amendment, and as long as it doesn't compromise our bill in the form of creating animosity and putting it in danger or compromising the policy goals of our bill, I think we should see what that amendment is and try to stay out of it as much as possible and get our policy priorities through. The rest of our bills are through, however. Senate Bill 22 and 23. 22, a reminder, is the extension of Class D garbage hauler deadlines. 23 is the bill that allows us to set our own threshold for railroad accident reporting to match the federal standards that supersede us. Those are both enrolled and await the governor's signature now. Senate Bill 51 passed the House, and it has been scheduled for second reading in the Senate for concurrence on the minor amendments that came through the House committee process. Had some conversation with a few commissioners this morning about Senate Bill 188. Put that in your packets. If you'd like, we can go through a very quick detailed overview of this bill. We did brief this bill, but it was in the clutch of all of the bills that came pre-transmittal. And I think we kind of breezed over it a little bit as a group. It had its House hearing yesterday. Essentially, what Senate Bill 188 does is establish a shared solar and utility requirement for the utility itself. Essentially, there are 24 states who have these on the books, and in those occasions, companies build what we would kind of consider a community solar project. In this bill, it's capped at 5 megawatts. Those projects are built and then put out for subscribers. And in this bill, if someone were to subscribe to one of those projects, the utility is required to track the output of that project. And if there is an excess of energy put on the system, there's a rate set here at the commission that would be paid back to those subscriber customers of that project and essentially rolled back from their consumption charges on their bills. Similar to net metering, not the same thing. Key things to note in the bill is it requires customers to stay in their current customer class. That's an attempt to not allow cost shifts from the industrial class to the residential class, et cetera. It also does not allow net meterers to also participate in that program. If you have solar panels on your own house, you are not eligible for that program. And the key thing to note is page 4, where the commission has broad rulemaking authority to, one, choose the methodology for setting the rate that those customers would get for this program. It also gives the commission the wide latitude to set how transferability of those subscriptions works, any participation opportunities in any customer class. But the one thing it does say is the commission cannot create a separate customer class for these customers. It would function within the residential class for the most part. They put a 1-year deadline on adopting rules from the effective date of the act. That may be a bit short, but a year is better than the 6 months we've been getting out of legislation lately. So just consider that. This passed the Senate. It may have some headwinds in the House. But that hearing was yesterday, and they'll be considering that an executive action at the discretion of Chair Perry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Trevor, I skimmed through this bill. I just saw the copy of it this morning and I skimmed through, but who pays the interconnection fee? It says the utility shall interconnect a shared solar energy facility, but have we drilled down or has the legislature drilled down yet on who pays that interconnection fee or how it's funded?
In testimony yesterday, the proponents pointed to new section 5, which is the bottom of page 3 and the top of page 4. And it reads, a shared solar energy facility must include at the shared solar energy facility's own expense all equipment necessary to meet applicable safety, power quality, and interconnection requirements established by the commission. So the way I read that is that passage gives the commission the authority to require interconnection requirements be paid by those companies.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Any further questions? Please continue.
Okay, that's the previous action. We are picking up a raft of 4 new bills that have been made into appropriation bills. I want to point out before we go through those, we are near the deadline for bill introductions. March 31st is the last day to introduce a bill. We're past the general bill introduction deadline, of course, but for revenue and appropriations bills, Monday is the last day. All 4 of these bills are in edit and appear likely to get out of edit before then. But if they don't introduce them by the end of business Monday, they're effectively dead. So we're monitoring these for now. I just want to put these on the radar. We don't have actual language, official language for most of them. Most of what I'm telling you, I've picked up from Scuttlebutt in the hall and then asking some pointed questions of the right people. The first bill is LC 192 currently. It's a big, broad title, which is always a little bit scary. I have to advise you that anytime they bring something under generally revised energy laws, it could be this now. It could be something totally different within energy land 2 days from now. What it's seeking to do is adjust the definition of public utility to allow for the public utilities to have subsidiary entities that are merchant generators. Although I haven't seen the language as it's come through edit, what I've been told and gathered from folks is the intent is to also include language in that new section of the definition that says only if that merchant generation does not create cost or ratepayers. What that means for you essentially is, yes, they can go take portions of their generation portfolio and use it to serve choice customer loads, large loads as a merchant generator, but they can't do it if it costs the ratepayers more. What's unclear is how much the ring fence catches up things like the ancillary costs, transmission projects that might need to be built, and whether in whole or in part, those are put into the rate base and costs that ratepayers may not need or don't see a benefit from. Additional balancing costs on the system that may not have been there had they not decided to serve these large loads. But it appears there is an attempt to make sure that the commission is still in charge of making sure that's not happening. I want to pair that with another new bill because they seem to be working in tandem, and that is LC 2604. They're calling it the Established Montana Data Center Development Act. Essentially what it does, and I did just see language before we came in here this morning. It goes into the large customer group statute and fully addresses the question we put to one of our utilities by just simply amending it to read any large load in existence after October 1st, 2007 can be served by the utility, and the commission may not prohibit them from doing so. The bill also says in a follow-on clause that does not prohibit the commission from setting tariffs and regulatory measures. Again, in the same vein, the commission needs to make sure that it maintains its discretion to examine those and prohibit cost shifts created by serving large loads to rate-based customers. The third new bill, and I have not seen language and don't have a good sense of exactly what it looks like, is LC 2387. It is bringing back the attempt to appoint the Public Service Commission rather than have elected commissioners. I don't know a lot about it yet. It's early and late all at the same time for that LC. The last new bill is LC 3651. Again, it's a big, broad title, generally revised public utilities and carriers laws. What it's aimed at doing is creating a Class D garbage hauler reporting, basically clearinghouse here at the commission. And depending on what that looks like, that could have significant time and workload impacts to the commission. That's coming from Representative Brad Barker. And we'll likely get a better look at that one as well in the next couple days. Last one to note, and I would note the deadline for study resolutions is still a couple weeks off, but the discussion of data centers has sparked more discussion of data centers, and there's a study resolution looking at the impacts of siting data centers. So those are the new bills. If there's any questions there, we can stop. If not, you'll be hearing about these again for sure, probably next Tuesday as they get formalized. And I would imagine some of these are going to move pretty quick. Okay, last thing on today's update agenda, House Bill 490, the Civil Liability Laws Bill, the wildfire bill as we've been calling it, has its hearing in Senate Judiciary at 8 a.m. tomorrow, as we discussed last week. The commission's current stance is in opposition. They did amend into the bill the participation of DNRC and Montana DES and requiring them to submit comments to the commission before we make a decision here at the commission on any of those mitigation plans. The question for the commission is, do you want to maintain your opposition tomorrow? I would suggest that there are still some larger questions out there around this bill in our regard. One being, anytime you make the commission make a decision on something like a mitigation plan prior to a rate case, it makes it a little more difficult for the commission to then approve or deny in whole or in part the funds related to that plan, because you're on the record in advance of that plan being brought up in a rate case. There are still, although the state has in a regulatory agency sense sovereign immunity, some concern over the shifting liability from insurance to utility to now we're in the mix. So although they did put on the amendments that we've asked for, and we've probably made it as solid as it can be if we're going to be the ones that do it, I think there's still some question around whether or not we're actually the best entity to take on approving the prudence of that plan. So with that, it's up to the commission. Your current stance is voted on. Prior is opposition. I would be more than interested to see where you want to go tomorrow.
Commissioner
Mr. Pre-
Fielder?
Thank you, Mr. President. Trevor, the arguments, the concerns that we had against the bill that were very apparent to me seem to have been addressed through the amendments. So the questions that remain regarding the things you just pointed out with whether the commission would be pre-obligated to approve or disapprove something because of our role in the plan. I think those are good questions to raise, but I'm of the opinion that we should probably switch our position to monitor and then have you appear as informational and still raise the question, talk with committee members about that particular question. But I don't feel inclined to come in as a hard opponent to the bill anymore. And I'll go ahead and I'll make a motion so we can have discussion on this, but I will move that we change our position to monitor rather than oppose that House Bill 490.
We have a motion to monitor as opposed to oppose. Is there a second? Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Commissioner Bukasek. Is there a discussion? I have concerns. Part of which was addressed by Trevor. If we say after the process is done, this is the proper action for you to take in fire remediation, how then do we, when we get the bill, which could be $100 million, we don't know. And there'll be another one the next year and the next year. How do we then say this is not appropriate? We've already said it. This is a pre-approval bill. I don't think that's something that we have no idea about as a commission. It should be pre-approved until we receive the facts. That's A. B, and I think this goes to the core of the commission. We are pre-approving a fire mitigation plan that, in my humble opinion, belongs in a discussion between the insurance company and Northwestern. What does the insurance company want to see? Not what did the Public Service Commission say 5 years ago. So right off the bat, we don't belong there. That's not what we do. And I think this is a big and. Our job is to rule on motions concerning affordable, reliable, used, useful, and safe electricity to protect and bring a balance between the consumer and the utility, not to protect investors on what might go wrong and shift it to the consumer. If they start a fire, I believe if this bill were amended and they took out the pre-approval, this is your limitations on how you may sue. They're going to get what they want. The courts will not be concerned one iota with what a bunch of attorneys and accountants said was appropriate. So why would we take the risk that a judge would say, you are liable, you made this decision, and have that hang in any way over the heads of ratepayers? So I do oppose the bill. I oppose that we are supposed to represent shareholders. I have serious concerns that the insurance company won't care. And if they come up with other things, we have what we put on there, plus what they put on there. And all of this will wind up on the ratepayer, who in no way is responsible for fire mitigation. So I will be a no on the motion to not discuss my concerns as an opponent, that if these things are addressed in the bill, we will become proponents. As long as these are hanging out there, we must be opponents because it's outside our mission, period. Any further discussion? Pardon? Yeah.
We look at Senate Bill 301 that had some language in it to reduce fire risk. And that was removed. While at the same time, we're looking at getting out of liability from the utility facing the fire. And I think that's why this bill was written. So I'm going to continue to stand against the bill based on that. They can't move both directions at the same time. If you can show me that they're going to do some due diligence in reducing fire risk by raising the standards of what a structure should do, what a power line can do, what a conductor can do, then I would say there's a trade-off. But to be able to say that we're not going to raise the standards or support standards, the utility can't do that at the same time trying to get out of fire risk, I'm going to be a strong no.
Commissioner Bukajik?
I appreciate both of your arguments against Vice President Fielder's motion. I just wanted to point out that as far as representing shareholders, I just think it's something that isn't thought of enough is that, those investors, those shareholders are what keep, that keep these million-dollar projects, these hundreds of million-dollar projects going, to keep the lights on and keep the heat going. So it's in that way, it's not really separable from the utility.
I think I would argue that a shareholder buys in with the knowledge they may increase the value of their investment or they may lose it. It is not our job to guarantee a return. Certainly, I would have empathy for and concern for the retired people that are counting on those investments. It is up to Northwestern to do their best to make sure that those investments are investment grade after they take action, don't take action, whatever the case might be. We don't do insurance law. So it is up to them, I believe, to show us in this bill, this is not an overarching everything, in this bill, that we are the lead agency on this. We aren't in charge of rapid response. Others are. We're not in charge of state lands. We don't have a fire department. We don't have a forester. We don't have any capacity other than what we hire for the initial with a $100,000 budget, 1 or 2 foresters. That's our capacity. Subject to check, I'm the only person here that's been a wildlands firefighter. If you think that makes me professional, I guarantee you it does not. Well, there you go. So, yeah, I understand a little bit about fire behavior, but I also know that anything we don't say or do is still on the table. Anything we do say and do is going to go to court. I don't think we should be the lead agency. That's my concern. It's not what we do. Commissioner Fielder?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think you've made some really valid points here on this. My motion was based on the fact that at least my major concerns with it, I think the legislature has made efforts to resolve some of those concerns. I'm glad that they've involved DNRC and emergency response. I see your point about where the argument belongs. I don't disagree with it. When I think about this, our role in this, I'm thinking about the actual structures, not thinning the forests and, clearing fire hazard away from power lines. I'm thinking in terms of more like what steps the utility can reasonably take to prevent ignition coming from their facilities. And so that's where I think our role has a nexus with it. But I'm at this time, I'll just stick with my motion to switch to monitor, or at least a softer no. If the commission prevails and wants to go in as an opponent, perhaps acknowledge the work that's been done to satisfy several of the concerns. That would be my ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm conflicted on this motion in the respect that, you know, there is a bit of a case to be made if there were amendments made that actually fix the bill. Then the right thing to do would be support. I mean, that's just kind of decorum 101 in my mind. But, you know, I'm not saying this is a good bill or a bad bill, but I think it is arguably a problematic bill for this agency. And if the bill isn't in shape to work in concert with what we're able to do as an agency or on behalf of, like the good president said, you know, to make sure that there's some protections in there for ratepayers, then I still believe that until it's either fixed, the bill would either be better coming back another session when there's more stakeholder input, or it goes away. I mean, it's, you know, sometimes problematic bills, if you can't fix them to the degree that works for us, then I guess I would still have to err on the side of opposing the bill.
I appreciate that, but Trevor, could you answer me this? It was my understanding at the time that part of the reason we opposed this was the Public Service Commission had no position or no rational position of being the lead agency. And all they really did was put in two others under us, but we're still the final finder of fact. That indeed was not amended out, and that was one of our major concerns. Is that correct?
Mr. President, yes, I think I would put it to you like this. That seems to be the question put to you, really in this motion or a motion to oppose is, are you okay with the commission being the final finder of fact? And that is still the case. Although now the commission will receive comments prior to making that final finding of fact from DNRC and DES in that process. But yes, you're the final decision.
My question is, when we first opposed it, that was one of the reasons. And though there's been some amendments, that has not changed.
Mr. President, that was definitely one of several things that led to the move that you all voted to oppose. And that certainly hasn't changed, although a lot of the other things have.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So your motion was to monitor. It was not to give our approval. It was to monitor it. So if it changes to monitor, you still will be involved, but your ability changes, or how does that work?
Mr. President, Commissioner, the way we've been operating, when we move to monitor a bill, and these are typically any bill that touches the commission shows up as an informational witness. So you're there to answer questions only if you're asked questions of.
Commissioner.
Just a little bit of meat on the bones there. We have also monitored bills, but directed staff to try to work with sponsors on amendments and things to resolve some concerns without going in as opponents on the record. So we can provide a little latitude if we wish when we're in a monitor status to try to resolve some of these questions regarding like pre-approval, that type of thing. And that I think that's inherent in the motion I made based on the conversation, was recognize it. We go to a monitor as opposed to opposed. Sounds crazy, but anyway, move from being in opposition to monitoring the bill, but still continue to express it. There's still some wrinkles that are concerning to us. Now, that's my recommendation at this point. I'm not gonna fight hard over it because I know there's valid points the other way as well. So however the vote falls today is fine with me. I tend to try to stay out of legislative processes and let them hash these things out. So we're not trying to insert ourselves when it's really maybe not appropriate or necessary. And if the commission feels it's appropriate and necessary, then so be it.
Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Panucci.
Let me ask you something, Trevor. If this bill passes, does the Public Service Commission have some influence on how they could raise the standards to prevent fires? Do we have a say in saying, hey, trees got to be farther apart? We've got to have conductors that have the ability to have AI technology in the core to measure resistance where a tree branch is touching, where a bird's nest might be built. We have some authority to say a structure has to be a little higher to stay out of the vegetation. Do we have any say in that if this passes?
Mr. President, Commissioner, I think that would be stretching the authority you're given in this bill quite a ways. Really what this bill empowers you all to do is look at the contents of the plan and make sure that the contents of the plan match the requirements of the statute.
Follow up. I think it's important to oppose the bill until I see some changes to where we're faced with tremendous obstacles with billions of dollars of fire damage and loss of life. The insurance companies are saying, look, we're going broke. We can't afford this. It could force utilities to be self-insured. The whole point of the fire risk meeting was to show that we can greatly reduce fires by making a few changes and raising the standards and grabbing a hold of technology that's available that no one's really using. Now, truly, carbon core technology is exploding and being installed all over the world. And with 250,000 miles of line, not a single fire has been started. Unless they recognize that, I don't see how we can give a little on insurance while not saying we have to raise the standards. So I want to oppose the bill. And when we oppose it, we explain we need to up those standards so that we're trying to gain some real ground on preventing the liability. I'd like to see insurance companies recognize when a utility makes the investment on hardening the grid, changing the standards how far a tree has to be away from a line, that we'd see some reduction in fire risk and liability. By standing against the bill, I'm hoping we'll accomplish that. That's what I have, Mr. President. Thank you.
Any further conversation? Commissioner Bukichek?
So I appreciate the discussion and all the points that are made, excellent points. I'm going to remain in support of the motion.
Okay. The last thing I'll throw in, it goes to what was just said somewhat. Let's say that Northwestern puts $100 million into fire mitigation and it winds up on utility bills. And theoretically, a fire was not started. The NRC, the state of Montana, did not have a $100 million bill in fighting the fire. Forest Service did not have a $500 million bill in fires up and down BPA lines from our distribution lines. All of it winds up on ratepayers when everybody benefits from a plan that works. I cannot imagine why we would put the economic risk on customers when the only transmission line they can control runs from Colstrip to the bus in Townsend, and there are no forests. There can be one heck of a range fire. That can be DNRC, that can be private, that can affect the co-ops. None of them are picking up an economic liability here. The ratepayer is standing alone, and I'm going to stand with the ratepayers. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of shifting from oppose to monitor will say aye.
Aye.
All those, I'm not sure I'm going to say this right, but all those that are in favor of standing with oppose at this time will use the same sign, aye.
Aye.
Aye. 3-2, we maintain our opposition. I believe we are at the point where we are done with our work sessions. Therefore, I would point out that at 2 p.m. we have commissioner training in this room. And seeing no further business to come before the commission at this work session at this time, we are adjourned.